Welcome back into the show, everyone. I'm Tyler Greever, joined as always by Mark Ennis and Andy Sweeney from ESPN Louisville. We will jump right into it, guys. Louisville on Friday night, a massive loss to Florida State. There is no getting around it. 35-31, the final score. Let's go over a few numbers just to kind of articulate how bad this was. Louisville has now been tied or ahead in the fourth quarter in 5 of its last 8 losses. And in the game itself, they had 3 turnovers and 11 penalties. So I say all of that to ask, where do you even start?
Just to add to the litany of stats, I mean, you've outgained the opponent in 10 of 18 losses. It is a bonkers stat. In 2 games, they found almost every way to be demoralizing. The flat emotional effort, bad game plan, cautiousness and conservatism, and then in this one, completely losing your heads, not able to adjust. A million tiny little nicks that all bleed out at the same time at the very end. The defense falls back apart a week after UCF, and then God bless the kid Malik with one more chance to lead a game-winning drive, doesn't do it. And I don't, he throws a bad pick, but whether it's him, whether it's them, whether it's the whole product, the poor guy's legacy is a bunch of numbers and not leading those drives for wins.
Yeah, I mean, with all of these, number one, we're used to this. I mean, we hate to say this, but for the last 2 years plus now, the difference is what we saw last year and this year against Central Florida. That's the anomaly. I mean, to a certain extent, that's why Louisville fans were so excited when the defense did what it did 2 weeks ago. And then, as Mark says, it reverts back to me, guys. There's the small picture and the big picture. The small picture is Malik had a chance at the end. They should have led by more at halftime. I mean, the second quarter was a disaster. You had to lead there by at least two touchdowns the way they played, and then you throw in a little salt to that wound with it being a backup quarterback. And it's like the first couple possessions, it's a punt, it's a pick, he looks terrible. You don't take advantage of any of that. Jordan Travis was dealing. But the big picture is, I mean, come on, this is where just about every fan is, that you know what you're going to get a lot of times with this team, the uneven performances. I mean, the penalties, the pre-snap penalties on top of another pre-snap penalty. It's just things you can't be doing to win games.
Well, it was the perfect storm of sort of bad optics and bad contrasts and comparisons. All the things we've said about the things that have plagued Scott's teams, haven't recruited quarterback well to where you have quarterback depth. The quarterback you have hasn't really sort of come, like he's roughly the same character he's been since he's been at really lots of good things, but things that hamper him in these key moments. A team that handles adversity, doesn't make these bad mistakes. Mike Norvell just went out there and in year 3 did all the things that Scott hasn't done in year 4. And it's just, you piles on, it compounds. It's just bad optics.
The penalties for me, they're averaging 10 a game, which is the 5th worst mark in the country. And that to me is a sign of a lack of coaching in a way, especially at this point in the Satterfield tenure. So when we look offensively and defensively, discipline, game plan, I mean, where do you really start to pick apart for the reasons for why this keeps happening?
I mean, I think it's not one thing, but overall, it is discipline with like a side of intensity, to where you've got a lead and you're going to go for it on 4th down, try to put this game away, and you have a wide receiver that moves early on 4th and 1, and then you end up having to punt it.
But 2 or 3 different times they had a wide receiver on a 3rd and short, run a shallow route. I mean, you're talking 3rd and 4, you're running. I mean, Hudson did it a couple times where you're wearing a 2-yard route. My biggest problem is, at some point, you would like them to be more prepared. For them to be the smarter team.
And that was the stage to do it.
For them to be the more intense team. For them to go into halftime or even after halftime when you realize with a backup quarterback that Florida State and Mike Norvell are going to have to change things, and that rarely happens with this team. This was one of those moments for Scott Satterfield, the goodwill of last Friday in Central Florida. I mean, everyone, the fan base had rallied behind this Friday night game, and maybe you knew it before. That game goes 21-21. You're thinking, is the worst case scenario going to happen? And it did.
It's the way Like, it's the vibes, it's the way that it happens, it's the emotion of it, to where that's like the worst possible outcomes kind of linger. Hearts broken, like people remember that stuff. And by the way, all the worst heartbreaks at home.
Yep.
Which people
So many
take
of them.
with them. If we get to the end and this is sort of it for Scott, we're going to look back on a game like Florida State as this was his tenure in microcosm.
I think this is the last time we can really do the whole biggest game of the Satterfield era situation. Until he proves differently and this team proves differently that they can come into a game like that, full guns blazing, ready to go from start to finish, then the other half of your mind has to suggest that fall back to reality is coming even after a moment like the UCF game. They're going to have their chances. I mean, they have ranked opponents throughout the year, but we talked about this the other night. There's just nothing to suggest from the past that they can really go on the hot streak that I think this program needs to really keep it.
We'd be wishing and hoping at that point. I mean, that's where we are. That's where we are. We have enough data over the last couple years. Louisville fans are burned, and they can say, "Well, we're not going to buy in again this season." But you have South Florida, Boston College, and then is it Virginia? I mean, if you guys watch Virginia, they have taken a massive step back. You win a couple. We saw that last year before Kentucky, the buy-in, and then Kentucky, and then the bowl game happened, and we know the offseason. So I still think fans will buy in again. I still think we're going to have another round or two of Scott Satterfield. This is the biggest game. He's coaching for his job, that sort of thing.
Oddly enough, like I think fans will be sort of out. And Saturday's game against USF, the only test or the only thing that we'll really learn is the team out. And I think we'll know. It sets up with kind of this weird 2018 vibe where you have like the heartbreaker against Florida State, and that team was done. They may end up with a better record. You can hope it. What you can't make is an argument. And if they finish with a 6-6 or better record, they will have done multiple times something they've not really done at all up to this point.
They will have evolved into something that they just haven't been.
Right.
And that's all we can operate off of at this point. This is what you've shown me in all of these close games. And sooner or later, it's not just, oh, we were right there and this was close. No, this is just who they are. And until they show something different, that's what we work with. So UK, on the other hand, much different result, much different opponent. First shutout since 2009, beating Youngstown State 31-0. Guys, this Wildcat defense continues to look like one of the better ones in the SEC and even the country. Is it that good, and can we compare it to that 2018 defense that UK loves so much?
Listen, I think it's good. I think the bigger worry, and we'll find out here this week, is J.J. Weaver's injury is a big one. He goes down early on Saturday. I know we'll get to the offense. It was ugly at times offensively, but defensively, it wasn't. I mean, they're able to play young guys. This last recruiting class, I mean, Carrington Valentine last year was a freshman playing, was not very good, and he's taken a massive step forward, but they're able to play young guys. They have a good mix of older guys. You know, Square came back, Jacquez Jones as well. So I don't know if they have like the star or maybe couple stars of 2018, but they have a mix of older guys, middle-aged guys, freshmen that can play. I mean, they're a good defense, and I expect them to be good next week as well. I mean, pitching that shutout, the first one in years.
And I think I feel like I say this every week, but like sort of building a team no one thought anybody at UK would ever be able to build. Stoops just has a roster with like a slew of 6'4" to 6'6", 260 to 315 guys that can move. And if you woke up and they had Georgia or Florida uniforms on or LSU uniforms, you're like, oh, yeah. But like he's got a lot of those guys. And they mix and match them, and Jordan Wright misses a game, and the defense looks fine. He's back, and J.J. Weaver goes out. Somebody else steps in. It looks fine. They graduate guys. It looks fine. Like they're fully grown, and they've developed depth that doesn't have these huge drop-offs. Impact guys come in right away and make a difference. It's a mature program. It's not going anywhere.
They knew who they were. They knew that game was going to be ugly. Yeah. They knew they just went through an entire week of being patted on the back. They knew they still didn't have C-Rod. I didn't think their offensive line played that well at all, which we can get into. But they knew enough who they were, tough, you know, controlling the line of scrimmage on the defensive side, and you basically just choke a team out. You win 31-0, and you move on.
And to Stoops' credit, it feels like if they ever even deviate away from that identity a little bit, whether it's the energy level or just however they come out of the game, he's pretty vocal about that. And speaking to that defense, just numbers-wise, they are 14th nationally in total defense, 20th in yards per play. So the numbers back it up. And they kind of need it because I think the offense has shown a little bit of inconsistency. Like the running game hasn't quite been there, some turnovers. And as you mentioned, the offensive line has kind of been up and down.
You have one more week. In Northern Illinois, who's going to be a step up from Youngstown, but still a game that you don't have to play your A-plus game, right? A-minus game.
Like a tune-up.
Yeah, to win that. It's still a little bit of a tune-up, and then you're Ole Miss, and then it's into the schedule, and then it's the Georgias and the well, who am I thinking of? Georgia's Mississippi State is on there. Tennessee at Tennessee. It's go time.
We'll find out if they can get enough offense. Because they are going to play enough teams that are going to make them have enough offense. I mean, Tennessee, you just mentioned them. Tennessee, Ole Miss, Georgia now. I mean, God,
They do everything.
They look right in a kind of a unique way, too. Those three have really, really good offenses now this year. I mean, they're going to have to earn it. But, I mean, I think defensively they're going to hold their own just fine. If they get into a shootout, I don't know about that one. But, geez, who gets into a shootout with them anymore?
Well, listen, I love what they were able to do Saturday, getting, Barian Brown specifically. He was involved special teams week 1 against Miami of Ohio. I think they did a good job spreading the wealth, did Will Levis. I think that was a good thing that we saw. Dane Key, another touchdown, 3 in a row now. I mean, he's really cementing himself as being an underrated player. We rarely do that in recruiting. That may have been a local kid. We may have under-recruited him. Yeah. But Will Levis, sloppy with the ball in the red zone. I mean, the interceptions. It's not surprising that they weren't on in that game, but they've had very high moments and they've had very low moments. I think on offense, and they need to clean up that offensive line, and they have one more game left to get the interceptions out of their system, to get the kind of the okay offensive line, because it's go time. I mean, a couple weeks it's Ole Miss. That's going to be a top 15 team. That's going to be a road game. It's go time.
Well, it ties back to the whole identity conversation, right? We're so used to Kentucky having a strong offensive line and being able to smack you in the mouth by running the football, but the facts kind of speak for themselves. They have the 8th worst mark in the country with 11 sacks allowed, and they've allowed 19 tackles for loss too, and they're averaging 2 yards per carry, which is just, I know Chris Rodriguez isn't in there, but that's unheard of.
They're a passing team
for Kentucky football.
Well,
right now they're a passing team.
And it's 2 yards per carry having played Youngstown State.
Yeah.
Now Florida's good, but Miami of Ohio, and you would think if these, you might be able to work out the kinks, but even with the kinks, it ought to be better than that. And I would be worried about that with not just who they're going to play defensively. I mean, Mississippi State is really good defensively. Georgia is the standard, defensively.
Absolutely.
But those teams are also going to, again, stress them offensively. Where Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Georgia are all, you're going to have to get into the high 20s, low 30s to win probably all those games. And they've been haphazard enough to worry about that in those games.
Chris Rodriguez, what does he bring when he comes back? I mean, you'd imagine he would be in shape. He's been, around the program. It's not like he's been away. He hasn't been banished. Yes, he's been working. He's been practicing, those sorts of things. It's a boring answer. It's probably somewhere in the middle. He doesn't cure all of their issues, but it cures some of them. I mean, talent-wise, he's better than the guy. He's better than Smoke. He's beat him out for, 3 years now for the job. We know he's better than that guy.
The first guy does not make the tackle so often with him.
Yeah.
And when you've got a guy that does that, subpar to just sort of a replacement level blocking suddenly looks really, really good. And they might very well have that once he's back in there. And the truth is, once you have just the most minimal fear of him and the running game, everything that they do in that passing game off of that is just extremely difficult to stop.
Absolutely. And you guys mentioned moving forward, the SEC schedule is going to toughen up. We're talking about a conference that has 8 ranked teams. Of course, Kentucky is 8th. The only 2 ahead of them are Georgia at number 1, Alabama at number 2. But then there's a few right behind them. Arkansas's at 10, Tennessee's at 11. You talked about Ole Miss in there, Florida, Texas A&M, all of that. Does UK being the 3rd highest ranked SEC team kind of fit with how you look at the conference right now? They are the 3rd best and they're just a notch below Georgia and Alabama?
I mean, listen, right now, But that all can change. I mean, like I said, it's go time, right? Like all these teams are going to have another week, and we're going to find out Tennessee, kind of that middle class. I hate upper middle class. How about that? if Kentucky is in there,
non-Georgia Alabama wing.
If Ole Miss is in there, Tennessee is there, Arkansas, despite how bad they played.
Kentucky has third best team in the SEC. Totally. I mean, because the problems solved are the biggest ones. They have a quarterback. They have an incredibly stout defense, and they've got pieces on offense. You can see like the potential there, and they're not even playing with their best offensive player yet. And so for me, Arkansas has bigger issues I think than Kentucky does. Texas A&M has bigger issues than Kentucky does, and everybody else I think hasn't played as well as either one of them. Maybe Tennessee ought to be there, but they can play each other in a couple weeks.
They got a lot to gear up before that SEC gauntlet starts. They'll get that done this week. We are done for the week as well. For Mark Ennis and Andy Sweeney, I'm Tyler Greever. Thanks for joining us.